Good evening, everybody, and welcome back to the channel. Remember, if you like the stories that you hear, or you just like my narrations, please feel free to hit the like button and leave a comment, as every little bit does help out. If you really enjoy the content that I've been putting on here, and you'd like to see it continue, and you'd like to see it advance, feel free to hit the subscribe button, and if you want to stay updated whenever I upload a video, please ring the bell icon, as that'll make sure you receive a notification. And now, without further ado, let's get in to tonight's creepy stories. The lake. There's a small village on the island of Hawaii called Ola'a. Nobody would ever guess the terrible secret this village holds. Following the accidental drowning of a young boy many years ago. Today, the tragedy still haunts the villagers and their children. Back in 1947, a group of kids were playing on the banks of a deep pond outside the village. One boy accidentally tripped over a log and fell into the water with a splash. Before any of the other children could react, the boy sank beneath the water's shimmering surface. For a few moments, they'd waited for him to resurface, but there was no sign of him. Horrified, they ran back to the village to get help. Some local men came as fast as they could and dived into the pond, searching for the young boy. They were terrified by what they found. The boy was sitting on a rock at the very bottom of the pond. His arms were hanging down by his sides, and his body was swaying back and forth with the current. His eyes were wide, and his mouth was hanging open, but he was dead in the water. The eerie sight sent shivers down the spines of the men who had dived in to save him. They were deeply disturbed, and said was such an unusual way to drown. It was as if the boy had calmly sat down on the rock and waited there to die. They retrieved the corpse and dragged it onto the bank of the pond. Everyone who lived in the village was saddened by the tragedy, but after the funeral, they tried to put the strange death behind them. Afterwards, bizarre rumors began to spread around the area. In the middle of the night, villagers would hear unexplained screams and cries coming from the direction of the pond. At first, they tried to tell themselves that the haunting cries were just caused by the wind blowing through the tall trees. However, as time went on, some people started to report disturbing experiences. Whenever people walked past the pond at night, they would feel something reaching out and trying to grab their feet. Many villagers believed that the ghost of the drowned boy lurked beneath the dark waters of the pond. They said that at night he would come to the surface, cold, wet, and shivering, his icy hands clutching at unsuspecting victims and trying to pull them into his watery grave. According to the rumors, he was trapped in this world by accident, and the only way he could escape was to find someone else to take his place at the bottom of the pond. One day, A boy was out walking with his father. When they passed by the haunted pond, the boy picked up some stones and skimmed them across the surface of the water. Suddenly, the boy screamed out in terror. Something was holding his leg and dragging him into the pond. The boy clawed at the earth, trying to hold on, but it was no use. Before his father had a chance to grab hold of him, the boy was pulled down into the watery depths. The desperate father jumped into the pond and tried to find his son, but there was no trace of him. Minutes later, he dived deeper and finally located the young boy. The boy was sitting on a rock at the bottom of the pond, arms placidly at his side, eyes and mouth wide open, swaying gently to and fro with the current. The father grasped his son and pulled him up to the surface. He made his way to the edge of the pond, dragging his son behind him like dead weight. Luckily, the father had taken some courses in first aid, and there, on the bank, he was able to perform mouth-to-mouth resuscitation on his son. The man did everything he could, and finally, just when he was about to give up, he saw his son's chest rise and fall, and the boy coughed up all the water in his lungs. The boy was alive. After that, all of the parents in the village warned their children to stay away from the pond. A priest was brought in to bless the waters, and the local people felt that it would put an end to the haunting. However, on particularly dark nights, when the evening skies were as black as ink, those who lived closest to the pond claimed that they could still hear the boy's terrifying screams. Some say that he will never find peace. Nowadays, nobody dares venture close to the pond, and every child in the village knows the story of the drowned boy. No one knows when the ghost will once again grow restless and try to claim another young life. This house possessed. I have always been quite adventurous, so it stands to reason that when I had spare time alone, I would hop in my car and go exploring. I especially liked finding old abandoned homes, and there are a lot of them in Colorado. My husband hated the fact that I would do this completely alone, and he was always afraid that I would get into trouble. When I saw a no trespassing sign, it was an invitation, so it's no surprise that I would often be where I wasn't supposed to be. One day, while out driving down some old country roads, I happened upon an old abandoned farmhouse. So I pulled into the driveway. There was no garage or carport, so my car was right in plain sight. This old red brick farmhouse was all boarded up, but around the side of the house there was an opening where one of the boards had fallen off. So I scrambled on up and crawled through. I found myself in a front bedroom. Of course, it was rather dark, but there were cracks in the boards that let in just enough light that you could easily maneuver throughout the house without too much difficulty. Imagine my surprise to find everything still in the house untouched. Near as I can tell, it had been empty since sometime in the 60s, so had been sitting in this condition for at least 20 years. I found this very strange, that no kids had gotten inside to party, nor was there any evidence of a homeless person, especially since the house could be easily seen from I-25, a major highway that goes through the heart of Denver. And there was an exit within walking distance to this house. Denver had a very large homeless population, just like all big cities have. The living room had all the furniture, lamps, tables, and the bedrooms all had armoires and iron beds. Everything left in the kitchen, along with home canned goods, spices, dishes, everything still there. In the bedroom where I entered, there was a portable toilet, and I wondered if someone had been sick. I got a feeling that was the case. I spent hours in there, just looking through pictures and postcards of the family that had lived there. There was a ton of Catholic paraphernalia, too. You know, crucifixes on the walls, rosary beads, and the like. It was fascinating to me, and I was trying to figure out why this family had left the house this way. And I was so surprised when I came out how many hours had passed. But I chalked it up to being too involved and losing track of time. I've never worn a watch, so it wasn't hard to believe that this could happen. This place also wasn't too far from my house, so I would go there as often as I could and wander the grounds, investigating the sheds and the outhouse. The root cellar under the house was loaded with old canned goods and rotted root vegetables. The smell, of course, after all this time, was non-existent, so it really wasn't unpleasant. I kept wondering what had happened there. I did not know that the family that owned this home lived just around the corner, on this same street. How I found out was they caught me there and ran me off. I watched them as they left and saw where they went. Now, when I would go back, I'd look to see if they were home before I'd go in. So, week after week, month after month, I would go back there. There was so much to explore. Time after time, they would catch me there, again and again, and always run me off. I always wondered why they never called the police on me, but they never did. I think they knew I was being haunted, although I was not aware of this at the time. Later on, I had been exploring for a number of months. I began to find myself there with no recollection as to how or when I had gotten there. But every time I went in, hours and hours would go by, and every time I came out, I was always surprised at how much time had passed. I would think I was in there about 2 hours, but would find at least 6 hours had passed, and it was dusk. It would begin to get dark, and I would have to leave because, of course, there was no electricity. I was completely taken over, and got it into my mind that I wanted to buy this house. So I talked to my husband about it, never revealing to him that I had been going there. I kept it a secret from everyone, even my best friend. I did some research and tried to find out anything I could about it. I did find out it was built in 1910, but could get no other information about it. I even tried to talk to the people that owned the house, but they would never tell me anything at all, and would just tell me to leave again. I never damaged anything and left everything as it was. I never took anything from the house until one day I was drawn to an old, green, woven clothes hamper in very good condition. And since I needed one at home, I took it. No one would miss it, right? Now I had made a connection. Bad move. Soon after I took the hamper, I had a dream. Or was it a dream? A figure in a dark, hooded cloak approached me and said, "Can I come into you and finish living out the rest of my life?" I replied, "If I do, then when do I get to live out the rest of my life?" And the figure disappeared, and I woke up. Creepy, huh? I do believe that the hamper was the catalyst for this event. I should not have taken anything. Thou shalt not steal. There's always a reason for his commandments. The next time I went to the house, it had been completely demolished. The house and all the outbuildings were gone. There was absolutely no trace that anything was ever there. Not a brick, not a board, not even a foundation. The root cellar had been filled in completely. I was devastated and wondering how and why did they do this. The house was safe and could have been sold. I had been going there 2-3 times a week, so I don't know how this was accomplished so quickly. I wonder if the dream came after the destruction, but I had not known what they had done, and the hamper made it possible for this spirit to come to me. I kept that hamper for a number of years, and was always haunted by whatever had happened there. As long as I held on to it, I could not release myself from the spirit that inhabited that house. Although I never had any more dreams, I finally did rid myself of it though, because I knew as long as I hung on to it, I'd never be free. I do not remember how I disposed of it, but it wasn't until then that I was finally released, but this had gone on for years. I'm very much more careful now when and where I go, and will stand outside and take the time to size up the spirit or spirits connected to these old places before entering. Please, if you are going out exploring and you find a place like this, do not take anything, as you don't know what you are bringing home. And if you have taken anything from a house like this, get rid of it. Now, my paranormal experience. I'm a 16-year-old male, and I used to be a bit skeptic to all things paranormal, until one weekend at an abandoned house. To give some backstory, I was with my two best friends at the time, Delaney and Julia. We were home alone and bored at Delaney's house with nothing to do. I can't remember whose idea it was, but one of us had the idea to drive around some of the old dirt roads and check out abandoned buildings. There are a lot of abandoned places around where we live. It's pretty far out in the country, surrounded by either farms or woods. So we went to the first two old tobacco houses, took a few pictures, and just sort of goofed off. We got back on the road and saw an old, unkept driveway. Keep in mind, hardly anyone lives on this road. So we decided to drive down the driveway, despite Julia saying we shouldn't because it didn't feel right to her. Not the fact that it'd be trespassing, just that she had extremely bad vibes about the place. However, Delaney and I insisted. We drove down it, and it went pretty far back into the woods. This is where weird things started to happen. We parked the truck in a little clearing and noticed an abandoned house in the distance. However, before we got out of the truck, the front sensor went off, beeping like crazy. Then, so did the back one. It was as if someone had walked around the truck. The weird thing about this is we were parked in a clearing, so there was nothing to make the sensors go off. Even if there were, they would have gone off before we even parked the truck, and wouldn't have just randomly gone off in that order. Delaney and Julia were kind of freaked out, but I just ignored it. It wasn't until later that this would freak me out too. We all got out of the truck and started walking towards the house. I was in front, with my friends walking a decent distance behind me. If I'm honest, I was just showing off and acting fearless. I wasn't that scared until I saw her. A woman with dingy, unkempt-looking hair, in a colonial-style dress, looking around the corner of the house. She looked at me and just put her finger up to her lips and shushed me very loudly. The feeling I had is almost indescribable. Imagine feeling as if all sense of safety and protection is gone, and you don't feel at all happy. My heart felt like it stopped. I started crying. I was so scared. I knew she wasn't human. I don't know how I knew. I turned around to my friends and screamed, "Run!" and started sprinting back to the truck. My phone flew out of my pocket about halfway back to the truck. My friend Julia told me this had happened, and I told her, "Leave it." Now, if you know me, you'd know if I'm ditching my phone, I'm serious. Julia and Delaney got back to the truck. We tried to open it, but it was locked. Delaney reached for her keys, but they were gone, and so was Julia's phone. It's as if whatever that thing was trying to keep us there. Delaney ran back and picked up Julia and I's phones and found her keys. We got in the truck and floored it out of there, back to Delaney's house. You might think it's just coincidental we dropped all of our things, but the thing is, our phones and Delaney's keys were all deep in our pockets, and it didn't make sense for them to just fall out on their own like that. Later at the house, we were all talking about the entire situation, and I was explaining what I had seen. My friends didn't even hear the shush, nor did they see the woman. I was afraid they didn't believe me, but Julia reassured me. The look on my face and tears were proof enough for her to run as well. We later found that there have been a few sightings of ghosts on that road by workers at Fort Pickett, a military facility nearby. I saw a ghost in my bedroom. Just to let readers know, I am a female. It was Thursday, and I had an alarm for 6 a.m. because I had school. I woke up to my alarm blasting in my ear. I grabbed my phone and turned the alarm off. I was awake now and was glued to the bed, so I decided to go on Instagram. That's when I saw it. Someone standing 1 foot away from me. My vision was a bit blurry, but I could see what she was wearing. She had long hair and a nightgown with flowers. Her legs were so pale. She was in front of my brother's bed, moving side to side gently while looking at me. I was paralyzed. I couldn't move. I went under my covers, started rubbing my eyes, and when I accidentally scratched myself, that's when I realized I wasn't dreaming. I pulled my covers off, and she was still there. All I could do was call for my brother's name. For my brother's privacy, we'll just call him Jack. I whispered while crying, "Jack, use your flashlight." I said this about 5 times while crying louder. He heard me, and the 6th time, he woke up and grabbed his flashlight. That's when she vanished, and my dog woke up. I was still scared and crying. I told my brother what happened. I still went to school. When I came back, I told my mom, and what she said still chills me to the bone. She said a woman had died in our house. She used to live with her son. When she died, her son moved away, and my mom rented the house. I'm no longer comfortable being in this house.